So coming off of the end of the previous chapter with us following this grand triple threat match between Okotsu, Uro, and Ryu, it led to all three of them simultaneously activating their domain expansions, which was going to be the first time that we were going to see something like this happen in the series. And that brings us to the beginning of the chapter where seemingly it's happening, and the narration says in overlapping domains, the can't miss attacks cancel each other out. In order to avoid giving Okotsu the initiative, Ishigori and Uro needed to keep Rika out of the barrier. And going further, it says Ishigori had just knocked Rika over 20 meters away, so they didn't need to do anything special. Rika would never reach the barrier before construction. So yes, this did happen in the previous chapter while they were all having their fight. Ryu got punched by Rika and got leveled, of course, but then he regained his composure and leveled Rika back in a pretty impressive display of power and sent her flying. And as it says, 20 meters away. So essentially, there was no way that she was going to interfere with this happening. And the narration is further letting us know that the last remnants of Rika Orimoto's will inside of the new Rika could not accept that. And her Cyclops eye opened the same way that Rika's did at the end of Volume 0. But at the same time, none other than Kurorushi returns. And on its way back to battle, it sent a swarm of cockroaches at Rika to keep her distracted. But the narration says, before going dormant, Kurorushi had reproduced by parthenogenesis. After the parents' exorcism, the cursed energy of fear throughout Japan once more poured into the child. Even if Kurorushi the player died, Kurorushi the cursed spirit would still go strong. So it actually happened, and we talked about this a couple of chapters back when the parthenogenesis aspect was introduced with Kurorushi. Parthenogenesis in a nutshell is essentially the ability to reproduce without having to be fertilized. And we thought, this is probably going to happen because Gege mentioned it in Kurorushi's initial exposition. And we thought, I guess this kind of has to come into play. Or else it would just kind of be odd of Gege to tell us that and then nothing comes of it. But the new Kurorushi is not only a nice little twist here, but he's also a foil for our characters here, but also the audience. Because going further, it says the clash of three domains is more complex than for two. As they erected their barriers, the internal and external conditions differed, and there was an unexpected intruder causing the barriers to break. So yeah, unfortunately, we're not actually getting to see the first triple domain expansion. And the way that it's worded here makes me think that maybe it was bound to collapse, since it was kind of on shaky ground anyway, with it saying as they erected their barriers, the internal and external conditions differed. So while we're not getting the awesomeness of a triple domain expansion right now, I assume that this is probably going to come back later on at some point, because Gege wouldn't be this mean to his audience. I think this is more so just letting us know what's to come, possibly. I mean, it's even possible that we'll see a four-way domain expansion in the future. Who knows? But I do think we will get to see the complexities of something like this fully fleshed out. But on top of this, we're also still not getting to see what Okotsu's domain expansion is, let alone Uro or Ryu's. And this is also something I expect us to see later on, Okotsu's domain expansion. Pretty sure Gege won't leave us hanging with that either, because after all, we're only still kind of in the first quarter maybe of this arc, so there's still a lot more developments in the battles and the characters and the power scale to come. But Kurorushi goes after Takako, and this could because she was already cut up from Okotsu using his Shikigami bat things, and Drew's ability with his Shikigami designating his domain, cutting her up in the previous chapter. And Kurorushi's whole thing is that he loves the taste of iron, blood. But also it goes into Kurorushi being a bad matchup for Uro because it says whom she considered a particularly nasty opponent, and this goes back to the original dynamic of Sendai Colony. The four big powerhouses all kind of staying in their own corners because they all deemed each other problematic and bad matchup. So they were waiting for each other to be taken down. And that's when Okotsu came into play and he took down Drew, then he took down Kurorushi, and that's when we saw Uro come into play, and then Ryu shortly after. after. But while Uro is being distracted by Kurorushi, Kotsu comes up behind her and just kicks her. And she tries to activate her curse technique, but because she had just activated her domain expansion, the curse technique burns away, making it difficult to use. So she's basically a sitting duck here, and Kurorushi uses his curse tool and sends those little parasite things into her arm, and it like bites her arm off. But not only that, because while her arm is off, like Rika comes up and like eats it. And this is smart, of course, because in theory she would just immediately use reverse curse technique and like connect her arm. And that leads us to what Ryu says when he's like, Akotsu's thorough. Even if Uro uses a reverse curse technique, regenerating a missing arm would be a hell of a feat. And then immediately after this, Ryu fires like a granite blast right at her and puts her down for the count. She's not like killed or anything because it hasn't been noted that she was. I think she's just, you know, KO'd or whatever at this point. But this further makes me think that she's probably gonna survive this arc and then maybe be an ally to Akotsu, because I've been saying, like, you know, our protagonists before this came out of their own little stretch of chapters with a new ally. And the way that Uro and Akotsu's dynamic has been is kind of making me think that that's the case here. And also we know that Akotsu is like super adept at reverse curse technique, and I have no doubt that he could use it to just straight up regrow her arm, you know, Sukuna style. So it's possible that he winds up doing that, and then she's like, oh, I guess you're not such a bad guy after all. All right, I'll be your friend. Especially since there's like so much more backstory that needs to be fleshed out with her, namely the Fujiwara stuff and why she thinks Akotsu is a Fujiwara. But anyway, the blast that Ryu shot at Uro also hits Kurorushi, and we get some more exposition saying that Ryu is the only sorcerer capable of releasing the same amount of power regardless if he's activated his curse technique. So I guess this is clearing up why he's able to do this stuff despite activating his domain expansion, because as we saw, Uro just really couldn't utilize her curse technique, because we also find out in this chapter that Ryu's curse technique is cursed energy discharge, which is like such an unbelievable ability to have in Jujutsu Kaisen. But he's just so powerful that it doesn't even matter if he's using his curse technique. He can still release the same amount of power just by using, you know, standard Jujutsu. But anyway, after this, Akotsu like starts walking up on Ryu, and it looks like he's just one-shotting Kurorushi with, I'm assuming, positive cursed energy, the way that he took out the original Kurorushi, but, you know, with a kiss previously. And we come to the end of the chapter where they're both like squaring off with each other, looking like they're about to do like their final moves. Ryu says, welcome to my table, Akotsu. And then we see like panels of desserts, which is referencing that this is like Ryu's ultimate goal here, because it was implied that he was never pushed as much as he wanted to be, like during his heyday as a sorcerer. Like he always had meals and dinner or whatever, but he never had his dessert. So now him having this grand final battle with Akotsu and Rika is finally him getting it. And we see him charging up like a granite blast in his hair, and Akotsu goes into like his same stance that he did at the end of volume 0 in the last moments of his fight against Geto. But the narration says Akotsu's curse technique still hasn't replenished. So this is pretty interesting. If he's unable to create like a similar cursed energy blast like he did against Geto, or if he's unable to just copy the granite blast or whatever, then he might be in trouble here. But then again, Akotsu's power set is so ambiguous and nuanced here that his curse technique might not even really be a factor here. Like I said, going into this being like misleading dialogue, possibly like making the reader think that he's in trouble, but he actually wasn't the whole time. Or he is in trouble, but man, it seemingly has to be the end of the fight in the next chapter, right? But let me know what you think is going to happen in the comments. And if you like the video, guys, please give it a like and please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day. I'll see you in the next one.